All right, Boker Tov. We are beginning. We're going to go back to the beginning of the third Perek. We just kind of read through the Mishnah last time. We learned Le'ilu Nishmat Avigdor Chai Avram ben Rachalev Mer Tzvi Zichrono Libracha. We Ilu Neshama for him. So we're going to go back. We already saw the first Mishnah, read and translated. I'm going to put it back on the screen, and we're going to go through it again. Then we'll be able to talk about it. There we go. Akavyad ben Halel Omer. Histakel b'shlosha dvarim. Watch, be careful of, the English says, mark well, three things. V'yata bali de avera, and you will not come to sin. And what are they? Da me'ayin bata, know from where you come. Ulana taholech, and know where you're going. And before whom you will stand eventually to give an accounting of your life. And now that those are the questions, now they're going to repeat the questions, which is itself a question. Why? From where do you come? The English is of a putrid drop. From the zera of the man. Where are you going? To a place of dust and worms, and all kinds of fun stuff in the grave. Before whom are you going to eventually give an accounting? Before Hashem. So we have a similar Mishnah, which we're going to talk about in a little while, that we already learned. And we have to see, like, why do we need both? Before we do that, let's first talk about who this man was. Akavyad ben Mehalel. It's not easy for me to say. I also mentioned last time, it is very customary here in Israel that at the moment when a body is being taken out for burial after all the hespedim and all, that this Mishnah is read by the one leading the aron, or the beer, whatever, the body being led out to the grave. And I believe we talked about last time a little bit that it makes perfect sense because there's a Mishnah, a pasuk in Kohelet that says, Tov lalechet el bet evel milechet el bet mishteh ki achai yiten elibo. It's better to go to a house of mourning than it is to go to a house of a party, because a living person will put that into his heart. What does Kohelet mean? Remember, Kohelet's written with a very dour, sour, heavy cloud above him. That it doesn't mean that if you have a choice, go to a funeral or go to a wedding, choose the funeral over the wedding, although that could be if that kind of situation were to arise. But it means that you have more to gain as far as your outlook in life of kind of putting things in perspective when it comes to a funeral than it does from a wedding. And one of the reasons, therefore, that this would be a Mishnah that is read at the point of the burial of a person is it tells us, look, this person is now going before the Melech Malchei HaMelachim to give an accounting. But all you here, all those who've come to me, those who are watching on Zoom and whatever else, you also have to kind of keep in mind about their own life, what they're doing here, and where they're going to eventually go. So first we have to understand, who is this man, Akavyad? It's interesting. It's not a Kivi, it's a Akavyad. So let's talk a little bit about who he was and make this a little bigger. He was a man of absolute, true integrity. Probably that's the best way I can describe him. I'm going to read this in a minute. This is two Mishnah. It's actually Perek, Mishnah Hey and Vav and Zayin in Eduyot. Eduyot, another time I can explain to you. It's a very not as well known Masechta. It has only Mishnayot. It is in Nezikin. It has to do with testimonies that were given by various Tanaim, by various rabbis at the time of the Mishnah, in front of Batei Din, to say that this, and that they were accepted as halacha. Okay, well, again, I don't want to get into whole back on what that is. Just the point now is to talk about who was this man, Akavyad ben Mehalel. And the truth is, again, I'd say the best word to use for him was integrity. And we're going to see with the next quote, or next person we're going to see in the next Mishnah, it's going to be a similar idea. Akavyad ben Mehalel he'id arba'a dvarim. Akavyad ben Mehalel went before the Sanhedrin and gave testimony to four things. Now, again, in Eduyot, it had to do with either things that were forgotten and that were being reestablished, or halachot that were not necessarily heard before, and they're given the weight of standing before the Sanhedrin and swearing in front of the Sanhedrin that this is their Misorah. So Kavya ben Mahalel gave testimony to four things. Amrulo, a Kavya. They said to him, a Kavya, Chazor becha be'arba dvarim, shayit omer, v'nascha av beit din l'Yisrael. Says, listen, we don't agree with this. We don't really want to accept this. And the Mishnah, by the way, goes through all of the cases. It has to do with tumat hara, ritual purity and impurity. I'm not going to quote them. But the Sanhedrin didn't want to accept this testimony, these four things from his rabbis. He said, I'll make you a deal. If you'll retract this comment, this statement about these four cases, we're going to make you the head of the Beit Din. Amar lahem. So Rabbi Kavya responded and said to them, Mutav li lihikarei shoter kol yamai. Better I should be called a fool all of my life, lo liyasod sha'achat rasha lifnei makom, and not to be made even for 1 hour as an evil person before God. Why? What would make him evil? Shelo hayu yihiyu omrim, so people wouldn't say, bishvil sarah chazar bo. Oh, you know why he changed his mind? Oh, he just wanted to be in charge of the Beit Din inside of the Sanhedrin, and that's why he changed his mind. And the idea of graft, the idea of being bought off, even just for kavod. So Kavya says, no, nothing doing, and he gives this testimony. Next Mishnah is a discussion between him and his sons as he lies in his bed dying. Bishat mitato amalif no. The time of his death, he said to his son, Bini, my son, chazor b'cham be'arba'ad dvarim sha'iti omer. I want you, the four things that I taught as halacha, for you and your generation afterwards, I want you to forget about it. I'm making one up now. It's no longer tameh, it's now tahor from this point on. It's no longer ritually impure, it's ritually pure. Amarlo. So his son was kind of like, what? If that's the case, why didn't you change your mind when you were standing in front of the Sanhedrin? Amarlo, he says, I couldn't. Why? In my time, the majority of my teachers held this opinion or these four opinions, and therefore that's what I taught. And they got their tradition of these four cases from the majority of the rabbis before them. Therefore, I stood by my ground. And they stood their ground. But you are in a situation where I'm the only one that said this, and the Sanhedrin was basically against me. You heard it only from an individual, meaning me, Akavya. And you heard the opposite from the majority of the rabbis of today's time. Better to set aside the opinion of the individual, meaning their own father, and take hold of the opinion of the majority. So what is he doing here? Again, this is itself an amazing shiur you can give on humility, on integrity. Integrity is the first half and humility is the second half. And actually maybe integrity is in both. Because he didn't want to seem like he was just changing his mind because he would get benefit from it. And not only benefit, he benefit in a very big way. And the other is, he also understood how halacha worked. That even though he stood by his ground and he still held what he held, nevertheless, when it came to the next generation, his children and on, he felt that because that he was at that point in Jewish halacha, the dat yachid, the only one that held that way, and everyone at that point already had rejected it, that from that point on, to keep with the veracity of halacha, that they should take his opinion and go the opposite way. So that's an amazing thing. It's also a lesson that we can get from, in many ways in life, especially that first half of the Mishnah here, or the first Mishnah. Unfortunately, people can be too inclined to change their tune when money's involved or when power is involved. I'm not even talking about the political world, just in the day-to-day life. There have been situations. There was a situation this past week where a woman who was abused woman because her husband wasn't giving her a get. That's a form of abuse. It's a severe form of abuse. And because we're being taped, I will not say what I think punishment for the husband should be. But severe form of abuse. She ended up getting her get after X amount of years. It turned out that somehow the rabbi who permitted the now ex-husband to remarry and write what's called a heter mei rabbanim was paid off, and all, like, he sold his soul. Okay, So this is so basically Akavia ben Mahalel is saying in this Mishnah, remember, this is not in our Mishnah in Pirke Avot. We're quoting him. This is one of his main things he's known for, is this idea that you don't sell your soul. If that is what's the truth, that's what's the truth. And if it's not the truth, then you have to figure out what is the truth. And that's why he is such an amazing individual, and why also at a Levaya, why his Mishnah that we just now quoted back here again, of know the three things, keep them in mind and you won't sin, which makes perfect sense now in taking into context. We started Pirkei Avot, by the way, about a year plus ago. One of the things I said that we have to also take into consideration when a rabbi of the Mishnah is mentioned and he says something, it's not in a vacuum. It's always because of something to do with something that happened in his life or his personal approach to things. So because you see that Akavya was a person who held fast to his principles and was also understood that there's an accounting to be made. Well, if I change my mind just because even though you might be right, people might say I'm doing it for kavod. He understood there was a din v'cheshbon involved. So that's why how this particular Mishnah comes out. So let's take a look. Let me make this smaller. I'm not going to use this one yet. Let me talk about it first, about this Mishnah. So this Mishnah is unique in the respect that it asks three questions, because it says, no, if you keep in mind three things, you're never going to sin. Number one, where do you come from? Number two, where are you going to? Number three, before whom you're going to stand and give an accounting. And then it repeats that. Know before you come from, tipasucha, a putrid drop. Know where you're going, to the kever. Know before whom you're going to stand, God. So what's this kefil lashon, this double expression? So if you have a very good memory, when we did Tanya together, you'll know that we talked about this. I'm going to give you like 3 or 4 answers to this, and he'll be the last one. Number one, first possible answer here. This is the Rambam and Rabbeinu Yonah explain this Mishnah as follows. They're done as a question and answer because it's meant to drive home a point that this is not just a one-off. It's the idea that something that requires constant introspection. The idea of me'ayin bata, from where do you come, is to teach you humility. The idea of la'ana taholech, to where are you going, is to teach you to, here's a word I don't think I've ever in my life used in a speech or class in my life. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. I think it's eschew, E-S-C-H-E-W, to like push aside anything in this world that is beyond what you really need. Because after all, after 120 years, that person's not going to be here to enjoy them anyways. There's a bumper sticker I saw years ago in Chicago. I'm sure it was other places. The one who dies with the most toys wins. There are a lot of people here that here the saying seems to be whoever gets to the red light first wins. Our priorities are very much out of whack sometimes, and that's what, according to the Rambam Rabbeinu Yonah, that's part of what this mission is about. And before whom you're going to stand and give an accounting is to encourage person to do mitzvot, because this is not an idea that after 120 years we end up in this black hole and nothing happens. We have a soul, we have an neshama that goes before Hashem. And according to some, our consciousness goes as well, and whatever that means. We talked about that before. So that's one possible approach. Another possible approach, what are these three things? And it's going to be the one from Tanya that's going to actually explain more, like, why is it 3 statements and then 3 statements again? But this one, the next opinion says, what is me'ayin bata come to teach us? Emunah. What does that mean? Emunah. What does it mean? Faith, trust in Hashem, especially faith. When the Bnei Yisrael, and again, this is a line I've heard before, I've used it before, it's not original. The Bnei Yisrael were in the desert after Mitzrayim for 40 years. We know that they got their food from man. Man came down from heaven every day except Shabbat. And that's how they had their food. A child who was born in the desert and grew up during that time period, as far as they were concerned, that was normal. In other words, if you're going to tell me it's a miracle to go to the Makolet and there's food there, that's not a miracle. That's life. That's how things work. But to them, so therefore to them, waking up in the morning and outside their tent, they didn't have to go foraging somewhere, is their man, It's normal. Now Moshe Rabbeinu dies, and Yoshua starts taking over. They're about to enter the land of Eretz Canaan to do what's called kibush ha'aretz, to conquer the land. But now the idea of man is going to stop a few days after they come into the land of Israel. I think it was 4 days, if I remember right. And then there's going to be something completely different. And what's that completely different thing? Now they're going to take a seed. And that seed, which using modern terms, contains all the DNA necessary for this apple seed to become an apple tree. They're going to plant that in the ground. The kids who grew up only seeing mud. What the heck? You're going to take this little piece of whatever it is, you're going to stick it in the ground, and food's going to grow from the earth? Are you kidding me? That's a nace. That's a miracle. Food comes from heaven. It doesn't grow in the ground. It's perspective. But it is. We don't sometimes appreciate the fact that every single thing that an apple tree needs to grow is already in that seed. Every single thing that a pear tree needs, everything that a plant needs is already in the seed when it's planted in the ground. That's absolutely miraculous. How much more so when we're talking about the zera, the seed of a man, that enters into the womb, and the egg is fertilized, and the baby is eventually born after 9 months plus minus. It's an absolute miracle. It's an absolute miracle. There's a Swedish photographer. This is already back in the 80s, I think, who was for the first time able to produce pictures in utero of what the fetus looks like. It's a blastocyst, becomes a fetus. Don't ask me why I know these things. And eventually, and you could actually see like the shape of the hand. You can see the bulges become the eyes and the toes and the fingers. You can actually see the growth over time. And now it's much more sophisticated today than it was back in the 80s, when I think it was the 80s. I think his name was Lars something. I don't know. And it's a miracle. And if you don't believe that's a miracle, something's wrong, because you've taken it all for granted, that there is so much we know that can go wrong. There's so much, God forbid the person could have a fertility issue. God forbid something could happen with the baby in utero. There's a whole list of things. And yet what happens from this tipa srucha, this little drop from the male, becomes a human being, becomes a walking, talking. The fact that I can sit here and think and talk and teach and eat and all these things, where did it start? So this is one approach that my Ayin Bat does, not just to make you think about, you really are nothing. It's all you were was a tipa srucha. No, look at what you come from. And this is going to be a similar idea in Tanya, we'll see in a minute. Lana taholech, where are you going to? It's a message to those who follow their ta'avot, their own personal desires in this world. Understand, there's a price to pay for that. That we end our lives, unless Mashiach, which looking more and more promising every day now. Whoever thought Israel be in a one-sided war, that we've just destroyed the Air Force and Navy of a country that with zero resistance, Baruch Hashem, Ken Yerbu. But there's an end. There's an end in the game, so to speak. And Lifnei Mi'ata Atid V'Cheshbon is not just about your Avot and your Mitzvot, according to this opinion. Rather, it's geared to the Batlanim. What are Batlanim? So the historical meaning behind what's called Asara Batlanim is people who were unemployed, who sat around to be able to make a minyan when a minyan was needed. It's changed over the years to mean someone who they used to say in the yeshiva world, they say he just sits and bottles. He's a batlan. Means he's wasting time. Time wasters. They're not doing averot. But they're also not doing mitzvot. They're not learning Torah for sure at that point. So those people have to understand, God, dude, there's a price to pay. You're gonna have to realize you're gonna stand before Hashem at some point and give an accounting. A person who's a heavy drinker or a heavy smoker may be enjoying. I hope for their sake, at least if they're killing themselves, they might as well be enjoying it. But at the same time, there's a price to pay. There's a very big price to pay. There's a doctor I know who was speaking to a patient of his. They were sitting together talking to me, so it wasn't like patient confidentiality thing. And we're discussing that the man was extremely obese. This is years and years and years and years ago. And he turned to this guy. He said, how many people do you know that are in their 80s that are obese? He says, come to think of it, I really don't know too many. He says, yeah, because they all die. Why? A strain on the heart and everything. what's the point here? That just like this Mishnah, when it comes to our physical health, also there is a price to pay. We have to think about that. Who are you going to have to give an accounting for what you do before your spouse, before Hashem? Okay. The last approach about and now more the question answer kind of thing, why is it said twice, is Tanya. The Admar Zaken, the Alter Rebbe, Tanya tells us as follows. That the first way, when the Mishnah first starts off, it's saying three statements. And it's meant more or less like we said till now, soul searching. Think about your life today. Think about where you're going to, and just get you to keep your eyes open and to think. The second reading, the question and answer, it's more expressive when you look at the Mishnah and say it at the same time, because he reads it differently. He says like this, make it big. Let's go to the second half of the Mishnah. Okay, so first he says, friend, I'm just going to read this part here. Me'ayin bata, where do you come from? Atipasucha. That's all you were. This is similar to what we said before. This is like, you were just this nothing, this little drop. Look what became. You are, this is notice all three of these statements Tanya says, is all about emunah. It says, it's unbelievable what you became. You're going to be going to where? To the ground, which is where you come from. This is the way Hashem works. This is the act of Hashem. Hashem told Adam Arishon that you're from the earth, and to the earth you shall return. This is Hashem's way in the world. And who are you going to stand before? You're going to stand before God, not you should be scared out of your mind, which is another way to read it. But he says, you have the opportunity to come kiviyachol, as it were, face to face with God, to talk about your life. This is like, understand, this is basically, he says, Ashrechem, you're so lucky that we have this relationship with Hashem. This is unbelievable. He says, that's the way. So the first half is just introspection. The other is like, wow, look at this relationship we have with Hashem. Let's kind of clarify a different question, though. Why three things? And we know that, yes, in Pirke Avot, we've seen many, we'll continue to see many things that Rabbi said these three things, this Rabbi said these three things. And we talked about the idea at the beginning of this class, months over a year ago. But why not just say, Yistakel, thinker can think about one thing, and you're not going to do another, which is, eventually you have to account for your life. You have to do a din b'cheshbon, right? Why not just one? So there is something that's used in counseling. I don't know if it's still used in addictions. It's called stinking thinking. It's mishubash. Though you think is like it's just messed up. We talked about this the other night in our tefillah class, I think, about the idea of what's also called euphoric recall. Euphoric recall being that when you're in recovery and you think back to what you were doing when you were acting out, when you're drinking or using or whatever it might be, that all of a sudden, like, wow, that was so fantastic, called euphoric recall. So part of the reason, according to one opinion, let me see if I wrote down my notes who said this. I didn't, I'm sorry. That this idea of why we need three things is to prevent this lousy thinking about ourselves. What does this mean? Number one, where do you come from? I just came from a tipasucha, from this putrid drop. Person might, God forbid, think, I'm nothing. I mean, what do you expect from me? Actually, I'm a noose. I'm a victim of circumstances. Like, God put this, he gave me a physical body. He gave me a nefesh b'hamit. He gave me this animalistic soul, which has nothing to do with animals. He gave me a Yetzer Hara. What do you want from my life? I started off as a little drop. What do you want from me? So to say to that, the Tana says, keep in mind one thing. Where are you going to? You can't just use that as an excuse. Oh, God gave me Yetzer Hara. It's all on God, right? By the way, there's such an approach. There's an approach like that, actually, somewhat in Hasidus with Rabbi Nachman. But it's a very controversial approach as far as I understand. But so said, no, if you might start thinking like, what do you expect from me, right? The cards are stacked against me in the first place. So no, they're not so stacked against you. You really have to start thinking. You got to start doing things and trying your best, because eventually you're not going to be here. Eventually you're going to be makom afar b'ma v'toleah. in the ground. And then you might even think that, so what? Fine, I'll do a few good things, but I'll live an Epicurean lifestyle. What's an Epicurean lifestyle? Epicurus, which was eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we will die. And then, okay, so what? There's nothing after this world. We die, that's it. End of game, end of story. Close the curtain. He says, no, it's not like that. You have to give an accounting before Hashem after 120 years. Good. Let me see what here. Okay, my comment. You read this. It's good to be used for positive improvement, but also for self-loathing. Sounds like a Melech Shlomo question. Very good. Excellent. Martin's pointing out it could be a duality here. On one hand, which is kind of what Tanya is saying, what others are saying, that you could look at this mission and improve yourself. The other hand, say like, what a screw up I am. What a bum. I'm a nothing, right? Sounds like a Shlomo Melech question. Yes, very much so. I like that. Thank you very much for the comment. Now, in addition to that, there's something interesting. There's a pasuk in Kohelet. If you've never read or learned Kohelet, make a plug for two things here. Coming back to Kohelet, as I've mentioned multiple times that I was inspired years ago to do the 929 project, the Perek of Tanakh a day, starting at Breshit, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and finishing with Divrei Hayamim. We are nearing the end of Mishne, so you can understand how long it's been. I think it's been 4 years now, something like that. I don't even know. And while I'm coming to the end of Mishne, which is very well connected when it comes to topics to Pirke Avot, I already decided that down the road when we're finished with Pirke Avot, that's the next thing we're going to be doing, Mishne, because it's unbelievable. I also have to see if there's a sefer that compares the two, the Mishnayot, to the teachings of the Mishnayot, to the words that are from Shlomo HaMelech. That'd be interesting. But besides that, Kohelet is read by Ashkenazim and Sukkot, Shabbat Chol Hamoed. The Gemara tells us, Bikshu lignos Sefer Kohelet, that the Chachamim, but while they were still deciding what was going to be included in the canon, in the Tanakh, 24 books of Tanakh, it was they were not going to include Kohelet because it's such a downer. We know the second to last pasuk says it for the final statement. But I'm putting a plug in for it because Kohelet, which is written by Shlomo HaMelech, it's one of his names, Divrei Kohelet ben David, was, in spite of the fact that it's a downer, it has tremendous lessons in there as well. Got a comment now. Judy says, I disagree about your comment about the local grocery. It is a miracle that there's food there at all. I agree. No, I don't. I wasn't saying that it's not a miracle. Not at all. I'm saying that one can look at it, could get like, just like the Jews who were in the desert, who grew up in the desert, that to them, it's Ma'asim B'chol Yom every day. They saw man. That wasn't a miracle to them per se. So too, we get used to things like that. You imagine for a second, someone walks into the Makvolet and goes, oh my God, it's a nes mina shamayim. It's miraculous that all this food is here. The truth is the person is correct. Of course they're right. This thing grew and this thing was produced and this thing was traveled, shipped, and so everything had come together 100%. I agree with you. But we don't think that way. That's the problem. Okay. So thank you very much. So there's a pasuk that says in Kohelet, appreciate your vigor, your youth, your strength in the days of your youth. In other words, what they say, I don't remember which comedian said that youth is wasted on the young. It's true. If I had the last 30, 40 years of experience, at least the last 35 years of experience, 35 years ago, things would have been different in my life, maybe. But the point being that Kohelet is telling us take advantage of your youth. And when you're young, you need to also take action. Some things we take for granted if we don't stop to appreciate their awesome. Susie, thank you. Also true that if we don't stop and think about it, we take things for granted. By the way, unfortunately, it has to do with our own spouses sometimes, which is why it's something I drilled into my kids from the time they were 0. Everything your mother does, your father too, fine. But I'm talking from my perspective that it's a thank you. I don't care if the mommy just put a box of cereal on the table, whatever it is, it's thank you. There's no such thing as the laundry fairy and the dusting fairy, right? Mommy did this and mommy did that. Thank you. And always to appreciate and not to get used to something saying, no, that's just the way it is. In any case, So there's interesting that there is a play on words here that uses this Mishnah as the basis for the play on words. Let's take a look. The word borecha has three possible ways it could be meanings. Borecha, the first line there says, haboreshacha, exactly like it says in the pasuk. Remember your maker, your creator. And in the days of your youth, and you can take advantage of your strength and do as best as you can early on to get into good habits and grow as a good ben Torah, bat Torah. The other possibility, be'erecha, ha-be'er shelcha. So by the way, so what's borecha mean? Ha-borer shelcha, your creator, that's the tipas rucha. It's Hashem's, the only reason a baby's ever born or a woman is able to conceive is only because Hashem, man, woman, and God, the three partners in the creation of a baby. So remember your borei, mean where you come from. Hashem created you. Be'erecha, your be'er, your well. Ha-be'er shelcha is the where you will be, where you were drawn from, and bor is the ultimate, the pit where you end where a person ends up. So there's a little bit of a play on words here that is giving us an idea of what does it mean in the Mishne, in Kohelet, we says zechor borecha, kind of connecting somewhat to our Mishnah. That's brought in the Me'am Loes, by the way. Now, there is an earlier Mishnah. I don't remember if I put it on my screen here now. Let me see. Yeah, I did. Wow. Okay. There's another Mishnah we did. It was back in Perek Bet. It was the beginning of Perek Bet. It tells us as follows. I didn't put the English. I'll just translate it. V'histakel b'shlosha dvarim. Be aware. Look at three things. V'iyata balidei avera. You will not sin. Dama l'malamcha. Know what's above you. Ayin ro'ah. V'ozen shoma'at. V'chol ma'asecha b'sefer nichtavi. You have to understand there's a watchful eye, a listening ear, and everything that you do is written in a book. So why does Akavya ben Mehalel have to come along and tell us another three things? So again, you can very simply just brush it off and say they each have their own opinion. Like I have an opinion what would be the right thing for what does it mean a Jewish house would look like? What does Shabbat Tebosh look like? You have a different opinion. That's fine, and that's a perfectly fine answer. But these are Tanaim, right? It's not like a Kavya didn't know about this other Mishnah that came before him. So why do we need them? So the two Mishnayot are actually geared to two different types of people. There are people who do Avot, who do sins, things you're not supposed to do, because of a lack of emunah. Give me a break. Really? You think God cares that I turn this light switch on Shabbat? You think God cares if I make a bracha or if I take interest? It's my money. I give him 100 shekel. Why shouldn't I get 110? Use my money. Right? So it's a lack of emunah. So in that, in Perek, in the first Perek, Perek Bet, beginning Perek Bet, in that Perek, it's talking to the person who's lacking in emunah. And like, look, understand something, dude, that Hashem sees, Hashem knows, Hashem is writing everything down. So might want to wake up a little bit and get over yourself. That's the first part. The second type of person who does Avot is nothing to do whatsoever. Let's say I do something wrong. Let's say I do things wrong. Of course I do. I'm a human. But I have a tremendous emunah on Hashem. I every day get stronger and stronger, especially living in Israel. So if I do an avera, I do a sin, does that mean I'm lacking in my emunah? Well, it means at that moment, maybe I was lacking in awareness and all kinds of personal failures at that moment. But I still have a tremendous emunah on Hashem. So for that type of an individual, it's the second Mishnah, the one about Kavya ben Mehalel, is telling us even deeper. He's telling us that we have to be aware of where we come from. We have to be aware of where we're going to, that we have to give a din cheshbon. They have a similar connotation, but again, geared to two different types of individuals and the psychology of the two different types of individuals. So what I want to do is take a look. Yep. Okay. We're going to go to the next Mishnah. We probably won't get too much into it because I'm going to read the Mishnah and translate, and I'm going to talk about the two people mentioned in the Mishnah. I don't think we even get to both of them anyways, but we'll see. This is Mishnah Bet. Now, some of your printings, hopefully not, but some of your printings may have split this into two Mishnayot. But I have it as, in most printings, you'll see it as one. Rabbi Chanina ben Skana, Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim Omer, Rabbi Chanina, who was the vice Kohen, we'll have to understand what that means. He said, you should always be davening or praying for the welfare of the government. Because if it were not for the fact that people would fear the government, everyone would swallow up his neighbor alive. Now, first, just understanding in very general terms, what does this mean? He's telling us that whether you're living in Russia, in Soviet Union, or you're living in the United States back in the days, you're living in the United States or in Israel or in Fiji, that part of your prayers should include a prayer for your government. Now, I know growing up that in the shul I grew up in, that I eventually became the rabbi in, we would say the bracha called Hanotein Shua LeMelachim, which was the prayer for the welfare of the government of the United States. And it's interesting, Birnbaum said, you said the president, the vice president. I guess it didn't have the words for Nasi and Sgan Nasi. Before that, you find older Sidurim that have the for the Tsar and the Tsarina back in Russia, before the USSR. All kinds of different tefillah. When I was preparing for this class, I decided, I'm going to go looking some old online. You can do it all on HebrewBooks.org. So I have a note to try if I can find some different versions of different countries of the tefillah for the. Now, why do we daven for the government? Even in Israel, you should daven for the government. Why? Because what does the government ostensibly do? A couple things. It has laws. Even when you're in a totalitarian government, in a sense, there's still a sense there's something that's being brought to order. Because if there's no order, it leads to, of course, I have to, for those of you who understand the reference of Get Smart, leads to chaos and Siegfried. It leads to chaos. So that's one basic reading. At the chaos of a man would swallow his friend whole alive. We have to understand what that mashal means, because it's just obviously a mashal or a parable. Let's read the next part of the Mishnah. Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion Omer. This name might sound familiar to you, potentially. His name is mentioned twice a year in Tefillah. I'm leaving you with that right now. Shnayim sheyoshvim. Ve'ein beinehem divrei Torah. Two people that sit together. You go out for coffee with a friend, and you don't say a single word of Torah. Harei zeh moshav leitzim. That's considered a moshav leitzim, like a place where you, how to say in English, the seating, the session of scorners. Like, I don't know if that's like the English, but like people, a bunch of lazy people that are just scoffing at Torah. Because how can you get together, not sit and say at least one word of Torah? Shenemar uvmoshav leitzim lo yashav. It's the very first Perek Tilim. Aval, but shnayim sheyoshvin veish beinehem divrei Torah. If you have two people that are sitting and they say some divrei Torah, now it doesn't mean if you go out for coffee, you have to give a whole pilpul on Bava Batra, Lamed Aleph, Amud Bet, and Shach, and the Shach and the Taz and the Shofar. Say something. Say a sentence, something. But if you do that, Shechina Shruya Beineh, the divine presence rests among them. Shenemar, Az Nidbui Hashem, Isha Re'eu Vayakshev Hashem Vayishma Vayikatev, Sefer Zikaron Lefanav, Yirei Hashem L'choshrei Shmo. In English, they that feared the Lord spoke one with another, and the Lord hearkened and heard, and a book of remembrance was written before him for them that feared the Lord and that brought upon his name. Sounds very strange in English. Anyways, wait a minute. You mean if only two people talk Torah, then Shechina comes? Well, before class started, I'm sitting here at the table and learning. Does that mean there's no Shechina involved? So he continues. How do we know that even if one person sits by himself or herself learning Torah, that again, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, is resting there? Shakadosh Baruch Hu kovei lo sachar, that Hashem also is going to give him reward for that. Shenemar yeshev badad didom ki natal alam. So he gives a pasuk in Echa. Okay, so this Mishnah has two people mention it, both with one is Chanina and one's Chanina. Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim and Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion. Both have very interesting biographies. And I think what we'll do is I'll defer to the two biographies to next week. They're short, but biographies and the Mishnah itself. But we also have to see, is there a connection between the two statements in the Mishnah? And if not, maybe that's also why some printings split them into two different ideas. So we'll see. I don't know. We'll have to say, wait till next week, Bezrat Hashem. I just wish that, Bezrat Hashem, I know it's Thursday morning already, to wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for the comments. Always welcome during the class. Shimon would say 3 who ate table. Let's see you on second. That thing's father. Rabbi Shimon would say 3 who ate at the table and not spoken over words of Torah as if they ate it right. Shochan zichem ate right. So there's another Perek we're going to see, another Mishnah. It says Shtaim shachlu lo amu b'dehem divrei Torah. Shlosha shachlu, 3 who ate. It didn't say divrei Torah. Gilu achlu mishulchan zichem etim. It's as if they ate from a table of. I'm not going to explain in English. It was gross. So when I was in Shalavim, we had a rotation. Every time we ate breakfast, lunch, or dinner, if you could call it tomato and a piece of cucumber dinner, we had a rotation. Someone would have to say a short 30-second Dvar Torah at every meal. So whoever forgot would always say, that's why I know it by heart. Whoever 3 people sit and they don't talk about Torah, like they eat from a table of whatever it might be, which we'll get to when we get to that place. Why 3? Because it's a mezuman. Okay. So Bezrat Hashem, we will reconvene next week. Bezrat Hashem. Have a Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.